He uninvited his own blood from the altar for being inadequate. What happened next was poetic. The words hung in the air of the rehearsal dinner like poison gas as my brother Declan stood beside his fiancée Sienna, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm while she smiled at me with barely concealed contempt. "Marin, darling," Sienna purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We've been discussing the wedding party composition, and we've decided it would be best if you stepped back from your bridesmaid duties." The crystal chandelier above cast dancing shadows across the faces of our family members seated around the long mahogany table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, my father's fork clattered against his plate, and my younger sister Ivy's eyes went wide with shock. But it was Declan's face that truly gutted me. He wouldn't even look at me, his jaw set in that stubborn line I recognized from childhood arguments. Except this time, he was choosing his fiancée's cruelty over our 28 years of siblinghood. "In fact," Sienna continued, her voice growing stronger as she sensed her power in the moment, her diamond engagement ring catching the light as she gestured dismissively in my direction, "we think it would be better if you didn't attend the ceremony at all. Your profession doesn't quite align with the image we're cultivating for our special day." She wrinkled her nose delicately, as if the mere mention of my work as an automotive mechanic left a foul taste in her mouth. Declan finally met my eyes then, and what I saw there was worse than anger or embarrassment. It was indifference, as if our shared childhood, our inside jokes, our late-night conversations about dreams and fears had evaporated the moment Sienna entered his life 6 months ago with her family's old money and country club connections. Around us, the other dinner guests, Sienna's sorority sisters and Declan's new friends from her social circle, watched with barely suppressed glee, their expensive cocktails paused halfway to their lips, eager to witness my humiliation. My mother started to rise from her seat, her face flushed with maternal rage, but I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. A small movement that made her freeze in confusion because she expected tears, expected me to fight back, expected anything except the slow smile that spread across my face. "I am Marin, 28 years old, and I've spent the last decade building a reputation as one of the finest restoration specialists in the vintage car community. My brother Declan and I grew up thick as thieves in a modest neighborhood outside Portland, our parents working double shifts to keep us fed and clothed. Declan was my protector in elementary school, the one who taught me to ride a bike and stood up to anyone who teased me. When our parents couldn't afford to send me to college after his graduation, he promised we'd always be family first, that nothing would ever come between us. But that was before he met Sienna at a gallery opening he'd attended for work, before he started trading his comfortable flannels for designer suits, before he began viewing our family's working-class roots as something shameful rather than a source of pride. What Sienna didn't know, what Declan had apparently forgotten to mention to his new social climbing fiancé, was that the dirty mechanic she was so eager to exclude from her perfect wedding had just signed a contract 3 days ago, a contract that would be announced publicly next week. The envelope in my purse felt heavy with significance, but I wasn't about to reveal that particular card just yet, not when watching them savor their moment of superiority was providing such valuable insight into exactly who my brother had become. My father found me in the parking lot an hour later, after I'd excused myself from the table with a grace that had clearly unnerved Sienna. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he lit a cigarette, a habit he'd quit years ago, but apparently tonight had driven him back to. I leaned against my 1967 Mustang, the car I'd restored from a rusted shell over 5 years, every bolt and gear a testament to the skills Sienna found so inadequate. "I'm fine, Dad," I said, and meant it, watching the light from the restaurant windows where Declan was probably toasting his upcoming nuptials with people who wouldn't have given him the time of day 2 years ago. "Actually, I'm better than fine." My father studied my face in the dim light, confusion evident in his expression, because he'd expected his eldest daughter to be devastated. But what he found instead was a calm determination that seemed to puzzle him even more. The next morning, my mother called before 7, her voice thick with tears and rage. "I told your brother he's dead to me if he goes through with this wedding without you there," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Your father and I already called the hotel where we'd booked rooms. We're canceling everything. We won't attend either if—" "Mom," I interrupted gently, pouring coffee into my favorite mug, the one Declan had given me for my 21st birthday with "World's Best Sister" emblazoned on it in fading letters. "Don't cancel anything. Go to the wedding. Wear that beautiful dress you bought. Support your son on his big day." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Are you insane?" she finally managed, her voice rising an octave. "After what he did to you? After she humiliated you in front of everyone?" I smiled, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across my workshop floor, where 3 vintage cars in various stages of restoration waited for my attention. "Trust me, Mom, everything is going to work out exactly as it should." The call I'd been waiting for came that afternoon. "Marin?" The voice was hesitant, uncertain, so different from the confident brother who'd stood beside Sienna the night before. "We need to talk." I let the silence stretch, turning a wrench on the carburetor I was rebuilding while Declan's breathing filled the empty space on the line. "There's nothing to talk about," I said finally, my voice neutral and professional, the same tone I used with difficult clients. "You made your position clear last night. Sienna made her preferences known. I respect that." "Marin, please," he said, and now I heard something that sounded almost like panic. She didn't mean it came out wrong." I laughed, a sound without humor that made him flinch even through the phone connection. "It came out exactly as intended, Declan. Your fiancé finds me inadequate for her vision of your perfect day. You agreed with her. End of story. She's just stressed about the wedding," he tried, his words coming faster now, desperate to smooth over what couldn't be smoothed. "You know how brides get, wanting everything perfect, and her family has certain expectations, and I don't fit those expectations." I finished for him. "I get it. I'm the mechanic sister with grease under her fingernails instead of a Harvard MBA. I'm the one who didn't make something of herself, who embarrasses you in front of your new friends." The words were cruel because they were accurate, and I heard him suck in a breath. "That's not fair," he protested weakly. "I never said—" "You didn't have to say anything, Deck. You just stood there and let her say it for you." The childhood nickname slipped out before I could stop it, and I heard his sharp intake of breath. "Look," he said after a long pause, "maybe after the wedding. After things settle down. We can what?" I interrupted, my patience finally wearing thin. "Go back to Sunday dinners where Sienna looks down her nose at Mom's pot roast? Family game nights where she checks her phone every 5 minutes because she's too sophisticated for our working class entertainment? No thanks, brother. I'm good." 3 days after the rehearsal dinner disaster, the announcement went live. I was in my workshop, elbows deep in engine components, when my phone started buzzing with an intensity that suggested something major had happened. The first message was from Ivy. "Holy shit, Marin, check your email." The second was from my father. "Saw the news, kiddo. So damn proud." The third was from my college roommate Quinn, who'd moved to New York years ago. "You're the Barrett-Jackson expert? Why didn't you tell anyone?" I wiped my hands on a rag and pulled up the press release on my laptop, though I'd already memorized every word. Barrett-Jackson announces partnership with restoration specialist Marin Thompson, industry expert to lead vintage vehicle authentication division. The article went on to detail my decade of work in automotive restoration, my reputation for uncovering fraud in the vintage car market, and most importantly, my new 6-figure salary and position that would make me one of the most influential voices in the classic car world. My phone rang within minutes, an unknown number that I almost didn't answer. "Marin, it's Sienna." Her voice had lost its sugary contempt, replaced by something that might have been nervousness if she were capable of such a pedestrian emotion. "I saw the announcement. That's really impressive." I said nothing, waiting, knowing what was coming. "Look," she continued, her words tumbling out faster now, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. When I said inadequate, I didn't mean your career. Obviously, you're very successful. I just meant that the bridesmaid dress wouldn't work with your style. But we'd love to have you at the wedding, of course. You're Declan's sister." "I'm busy that day," I said simply. "But I have 3 cars to deliver to Barrett-Jackson's Scottsdale auction," I continued, my tone professional and distant, "including a 1963 Corvette Stingray split-window coupe that's expected to fetch over $2 million. I'm sure you understand. Business before pleasure." The silence on her end was delicious. That evening, Declan showed up at my workshop unannounced, something he hadn't done in months. He stood in the doorway of my garage, looking uncomfortable in his tailored suit among the tools and car parts that had always been my domain. "You could have told me," he said without preamble, "about the Barrett-Jackson thing. Made me look like an idiot. Letting Sienna what?" I interrupted, not looking up from the transmission I was reassembling. "Humiliate your sister in front of your entire wedding party? You didn't let her do anything, Deck. You participated enthusiastically." He flinched at the use of his nickname again, the one only I had ever used. The reminder of who we used to be before Sienna reshaped him into someone I barely recognized. "She wants you at the wedding now," he said quietly. "Wants to make things right." I finally looked at him then. Really looked at him and saw the boy who'd taught me to throw a baseball and helped me build my first soapbox derby car. But I also saw the man who'd stood silent while his fiancée called me inadequate, who'd chosen social climbing over sibling loyalty, who'd forgotten where he came from in his rush to get where he was going. "You want to know what's funny?" I asked, setting down my wrench and wiping my hands. "When I signed that contract 3 days before your rehearsal dinner, the first person I wanted to call was you, my big brother, the one who'd always believed in me, who used to tell people his little sister could fix anything with an engine. But then I realized I didn't know that person anymore." Declan's face crumpled, a flash of the brother I'd lost somewhere in Sienna's designer orbit. "Marin, please," he whispered. "I made a mistake. I should have stood up for you. Should have told Sienna that your family, and family comes first. Should have done a lot of things." I agreed. "But you didn't. And now you get to live with that choice. Congratulations on your wedding. I'm sure it'll be everything Sienna wants it to be." The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks out. A Saturday afternoon affair at an exclusive venue that reportedly cost more than my parents had paid for their house. I knew this because Ivy kept me updated, torn between loyalty to me and not wanting to miss our brother's wedding entirely. "Mom's barely speaking to him. she reported over coffee 2 weeks before the big day. Dad keeps making comments about people forgetting where they came from. It's super awkward. I stirred my latte, watching the foam swirl into complex patterns. They should go, I told her firmly. He's their son. This is his wedding. They should be there. Ivy looked at me like I'd grown a second head. After what he did to you? After Sienna called you inadequate in front of everyone? Especially after that, I said quietly. Because when this all shakes out, I want them to know they did the right thing. They supported their son, even when he didn't deserve it. That's what family does. The week before the wedding, Sienna's mother called me. I'd never spoken to the woman before, knew her only as the society matriarch whose name appeared in charity event announcements and country club membership lists. Miss Thompson, she began, her voice carrying the crisp authority of old money. My daughter explained there's been a regrettable misunderstanding. We'd be honored if you'd reconsider attending the wedding. In fact, we'd like to offer you a place of honor among the family. I almost laughed at the transparent attempt to have the Barrett-Jackson expert visible at their society wedding. I appreciate the invitation, I said carefully, but my previous commitment stands. However, I've sent a wedding gift that should arrive before the ceremony. I hope Declan and Sienna find it enlightening. The pause on the other end suggested she wanted to ask what the gift was, but her breeding prevented such a gauche question. How thoughtful, she managed. I'll make sure they receive it with our gratitude. The gift arrived at Declan's apartment the morning of the wedding, delivered by bonded courier in a presentation box that spoke of expensive contents. I knew this because Ivy texted me a photo of Declan's face as he opened it, a face frozen somewhere between confusion and dawning horror. Inside the box was a leather-bound portfolio containing documentation of every car I'd restored over the past decade, every award I'd won, every industry recognition I'd received, every article written about my expertise in automotive authentication and fraud detection. But the real gift, the piece that made my brother's hands shake as he held it, was the letter tucked into the front pocket, written in my own hand the night after the rehearsal dinner. Dear Declan, the letter read, remember when we were kids and you told me I could be anything I wanted to be? Remember when I was 16 and rebuilt my first engine? And you were the one who helped me pull it out of that rusted Mustang in Mr. Henderson's junkyard? Remember when I got rejected from the only college I'd applied to? And you told me that traditional paths weren't the only way to build a life? I became who I am because you believed in me first, before anyone else did. You taught me that success isn't measured by degrees or zip codes, but by the integrity you bring to your work and the loyalty you show to the people who matter. I wrote this letter 3 days before your rehearsal dinner, planning to read it at your wedding reception because I was so proud of the man you'd become. But then I learned that the brother who taught me about integrity and loyalty had traded both for a woman who measures people's worth by their social utility. I'll spare you the appearance at your wedding, Declan, not because I'm inadequate for Sienna's vision of perfection, but because I deserve better than to stand witness while you marry someone who brings out the worst in you rather than the best. Congratulations on your big day. I hope it's everything you've sacrificed for. With love and disappointment, Myron. My phone rang at noon on Declan's wedding day, his number flashing on the screen as I stood in the Barrett-Jackson authentication facility, examining a suspected counterfeit Ferrari. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to his message 20 minutes later when I'd finished my inspection. Myron, his voice was thick with tears or emotion I couldn't quite identify. I read your letter. I read it 3 times. And you're right. About all of it. About me. About Sienna, about what I've become. A long pause filled with what sounded like a sob being strangled down. The wedding starts in 4 hours, and all I can think about is how my little sister is the only person who had the guts to tell me the truth. I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am anymore. The message ended with a click that sounded final, and I stood in the gleaming showroom surrounded by millions of dollars in classic automotive history, wondering if my brother would actually go through with a wedding to a woman who'd made him choose between his family and her approval. The answer came from Ivy's frantic text 2 hours later. Wedding's off. Complete chaos. Mom's crying. Sienna's screaming. Dad looks like he wants to punch someone. Declan asked me to ask you if you'll meet him. I stared at the message for a long moment, the words rearranging themselves into a story I hadn't quite expected. The petty part of me, the part that had been humiliated in front of a room full of strangers, wanted to say no, to let him sit with the consequences of his choices. But the part that remembered our childhood, that remembered the brother who'd believed in me when no one else did, that remembered the fundamental truth that people were capable of waking up from their own bad decisions, sent back a single word: where. We met at the same workshop where I'd spent my childhood weekends helping Dad fix neighbors' cars for grocery money, a place Declan hadn't visited in over 2 years. He looked like hell when he walked through the bay door, his designer tuxedo jacket abandoned somewhere, his shirt collar undone, his carefully styled hair falling into his face. I called it off, he said without preamble, slumping against my workbench. Told Sienna I couldn't marry someone who made me choose between her and my family. She didn't take it well. I wiped my hands on a rag, studying the brother I'd thought I'd lost. What did she say? Declan laughed, a sound edged with bitterness. She said I was throwing away our future for a grease monkey who'd never amount to anything. Said I'd regret choosing poverty over prosperity. Then she threw her engagement ring at me and told me I'd be sorry when I was 40 and alone while she was living her best life. He pulled the ring from his pocket. A gaudy 3-carat monstrosity that probably cost more than my Mustang. I should have seen it before, the way she talked about people, how she measured everyone by their bank accounts and zip codes. She didn't love me. She loved the version of me she was creating. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Quinn, my roommate from community college who now ran a successful PR firm in Manhattan. The message made my blood run cold. Your brother's ex-fiancé is already posting on social media. Says he had a breakdown. Called off the wedding because of family pressure from jealous relatives. She's painting herself as the victim and you as the villain who couldn't handle her success. It's getting traction. I showed Declan the phone, watching his face cycle through shock, anger, and something that looked like guilt. She's lying, he said flatly. I need to make a statement. Tell people the truth. The truth that you let her humiliate your sister until she pushed too far? I interrupted. The truth that you chose her social circle over your own family until you got a wake-up call? That's going to play real well, Deck. His face crumpled. I deserve that. I deserve all of it, but you don't deserve to be dragged through the mud by her. I pulled up Sienna's social media on my laptop, reading through her carefully crafted narrative of a bride left at the altar by a man corrupted by his bitter, jealous sister who couldn't stand to see him happy. The comments were already rolling in, hundreds of them from her sorority sisters and country club connections, all expressing sympathy for poor Sienna and contempt for the unnamed family member who'd ruined her perfect day. She's good, I admitted, scrolling through the performance. I'll give her that. Playing the wronged woman, subtle enough not to name me directly, but clear enough that anyone who was at that rehearsal dinner knows exactly who she means. Ivy burst through the door then, her bridesmaid dress torn at the hem, mascara streaking her face. That psycho is telling everyone you sabotaged the wedding because you were jealous of her relationship with Declan. She showed people your letter, said it proved you were obsessed with keeping him dependent on you. And Mrs. Blackwood, the society columnist, was there. She's already posted about small-town jealousy destroying true love without naming names, but everyone knows who she's talking about. I felt something cold settle in my chest, a calculating fury that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with strategy. My phone rang, an unknown number with a Manhattan area code. Marin Thompson, I answered, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling around me. Miss Thompson, this is Garrett Mills from Collector Car Weekly. I'm calling about the social media situation involving your brother's canceled wedding. Would you care to comment on the allegations that you interfered in his relationship? I glanced at Declan, whose face had gone pale, then at my computer screen where Sienna's victim narrative was gaining momentum by the minute. No comment at this time, I said carefully, but I'll be releasing a statement through my representation tomorrow morning. After I hung up, Declan stood abruptly. Your representation? Marin, you don't need to. This is my mess. I should be the one to clean it up. I pulled up my email, finding the message from Barrett Jackson's legal team that had arrived an hour ago. They'd seen the social media firestorm and were offering their full support, including access to their public relations specialists and attorneys if the situation threatened to damage my professional reputation. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm and methodical as I formulated a plan that was forming with crystal clarity. You're going to go home, get some sleep, and tomorrow you're going to write an honest statement about why you called off the wedding. Nothing about me, nothing dramatic, just the truth that you and Sienna weren't compatible. Declan nodded slowly. And what are you going to do? I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to look under the hood and find out what's really driving Sienna's engine. Ivy tilted her head in confusion. What does that mean? I pulled up Sienna's social media profile, studying not the recent posts about her tragic canceled wedding, but the older content, the carefully curated images of luxury and success that painted a picture of old money and effortless sophistication. It means, I said slowly, clicking through photographs of designer handbags and exotic vacations, that I'm going to authenticate whether Sienna is the genuine article she claims to be, or if she's just a very convincing restoration job. That night, I called in a favor from Bennett, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on several classic car fraud cases. I need you to look into someone, I told him, sending over Sienna's full name and the information I'd gathered. Her family's supposed to be old money, country club elite, the whole package, but something doesn't add up. Bennett's fingers flew across his keyboard, and I heard his low whistle through the phone. Marin, you might want to sit down for this. Over the next hour, he laid out what he'd found in public records, tax documents, and financial databases. Sienna's family wasn't old money. They were drowning in debt. Her father had made a series of disastrous investments 5 years ago, and lost most of the family fortune. The country club membership was 3 months behind on dues. The designer wardrobe was financed through maxed-out credit cards. Even the engagement ring Declan had bought was sitting on a payment plan he didn't know about because Sienna had helped him with the paperwork at the jeweler. She was hunting for a financial recovery, Bennett said bluntly. Your brother's stable income, his rising career trajectory, his family's modest but debt-free existence. She saw a life raft. I sat in the darkness of my workshop, pieces clicking together with the precision of a perfectly timed engine. Sienna hadn't fallen for Declan despite his working-class roots. She'd targeted him because of his potential to provide the stability her family had lost. And when she'd found out about my Barrett-Jackson contract, she'd tried to erase me from the picture before I could expose the truth about her manufactured image of wealth. Can you document all of this? I asked Bennett. Every bit of it. Financial statements? Debt records? The whole story? I heard paper rustling. Already creating the file. What are you planning, Marin? I looked at my computer screen where Sienna's posts continued to multiply, each one painting me as the jealous villain in her fairy tale tragedy. I'm planning to show everyone what a real fraud investigation looks like. Sienna wanted to play in my world. She's about to learn that I don't just authenticate cars. The Barrett-Jackson legal team conference call happened at 6 the next morning. 7 sharp-dressed attorneys and PR specialists joining from their offices in Scottsdale. Miss Thompson, the lead attorney began, her voice crisp and professional. We've reviewed the social media situation. While Ms. Blackwood hasn't named you explicitly, the implication is clear and potentially damaging to both your reputation and ours by association. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside me. The file Bennett had compiled spread across every available surface. I understand the concern, I said carefully, but before we issue any defensive statements, I'd like to present something to the team. I shared my screen, walking them through Bennett's findings with the same methodical precision I used when exposing counterfeit vintage cars. The silence on the other end grew heavier with each revelation about Sienna's financial house of cards, her family's bankruptcy filing from 3 years ago that had been sealed through expensive legal maneuvering, the credit card fraud investigation her father had narrowly avoided. This is remarkable investigative work, the PR specialist finally said, her tone shifting from defensive to intrigued. But Miss Thompson, we need to be very careful about how we use this information. If we appear to be attacking a jilted bride, it could backfire spectacularly. I nodded, having anticipated this concern. I'm not suggesting we attack anyone. I'm suggesting we tell a story about authentication and fraud detection, about how the same skills used to identify counterfeit classic cars can be applied to spotting manufactured personas. It's what I do for a living, after all. The lead attorney leaned forward, her image pixelating slightly on my screen. You want to use this as a professional demonstration? I pulled up a draft I'd been working on since 3 that morning. Barrett-Jackson hired me because I can spot a fraud from a mile away. Sienna made this personal by trying to damage my professional reputation. I'm proposing we make it educational instead. A case study in how people, like cars, sometimes present one thing on the surface while hiding serious structural problems underneath. The team spent the next 2 hours helping me refine the approach, turning my raw anger and Bennett's financial forensics into something that would showcase my expertise while systematically dismantling Sienna's victim narrative. We crafted a statement that never mentioned Sienna by name, but made it abundantly clear to anyone following the story exactly what was being said. In my professional capacity as Barrett-Jackson's lead authentication specialist, I've spent a decade learning to identify vehicles that present as one thing while concealing another. This skill extends beyond automotive restoration. When someone constructs a false narrative about events I personally witnessed, using social media to manipulate public opinion while hiding significant facts about their own circumstances, it demonstrates the same pattern I see in fraud cases. The truth, like a genuine classic car, can withstand the most rigorous inspection. Manufactured stories, like counterfeit vehicles, fall apart under scrutiny. Quinn called from her Manhattan office after reading the draft statement. This is brilliant and terrifying, she said without preamble. You're basically calling her a fraud without saying her name. The legal team signed off on this? I glanced at the approval email that had arrived 20 minutes ago. They refined the language to be bulletproof. Everything I'm saying is demonstrably true and protected as professional commentary. Quinn's laugh was sharp. Sienna's going to lose her mind when this goes live. Her whole social circle is going to start asking questions she can't answer. She paused. Are you sure you want to do this? Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. You're not just defending yourself. You're burning her entire world down. I thought about the rehearsal dinner, about watching my brother stand silent while his fiancée called me inadequate, about the carefully crafted social media posts painting me as a jealous villain. She tried to burn my reputation first, I said quietly. I'm just better at it than she is. The statement went live at noon on Barrett-Jackson's official channels, accompanied by a professional photograph of me in my workshop and a sidebar highlighting my credentials and recent authentication successes. Within an hour, it had been picked up by automotive media outlets. Within 2 hours, mainstream news was running stories about the wedding drama expert revenge. By evening, Sienna's social media had gone from sympathetic outpouring to pointed questions. If she's such old money, why can't I find any record of the family's businesses? One comment read. Another, anyone else notice she deleted all her posts from before 2 years ago? A third, my friend works at the country club, says they're about to lose their membership for non-payment. I watched the narrative shift in real time. Sienna's carefully constructed victim story crumbling as people started looking beneath the shiny surface she'd presented. Declan showed up at my door that evening, his expression caught somewhere between awe and horror. Marin, what did you do? Sienna's phone has been ringing nonstop. People asking about her family's finances. Reporters wanting statements. Her mother called me screaming about defamation. I handed him a beer and gestured to the couch. I did exactly what I told you I'd do. I authenticated whether she was genuine or counterfeit. He took a long drink. Processing. Bennett's report. Where did you even get all that information? I pulled up the public records on my laptop, showing him the bankruptcy filings, the lien notices, the mountain of debt hidden behind designer labels and country club addresses. It's all publicly available if you know where to look. I just applied the same investigative techniques I use for 6-figure car frauds to a 6-figure personality fraud. Declan's hands shook slightly as he scrolled through the documents. I feel like an idiot. All those times she insisted on expensive restaurants, said she'd handle the bills, told me her family wanted to contribute to the wedding costs. She was using my money to maintain her image. He looked up. His eyes read. She was going to bankrupt me, wasn't she? I nodded slowly. Bennett found preliminary vendor contracts for your wedding. She'd committed you to over $200,000 in expenses without telling you. The venue, the catering, the designer dress, all billed to credit accounts in your name that she'd opened with your information. The color drained from Declan's face. That's fraud. That's actual criminal fraud. I'd been waiting for him to reach this realization. Yes, and the only reason you're not on the hook for it is because you canceled the wedding before the contracts became binding. He stood abruptly, pacing my small living room. We need to report this. Press charges. She can't just— I held up a hand. Already done. Barrett Jackson's legal team connected me with a white-collar crime specialist this afternoon. They're filing charges first thing Monday morning. Identity theft, credit fraud, potentially conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Declan stopped pacing, staring at me. You did all this in one day? I met his gaze steadily. I told you, Dec. This is what I do. I find the flaws, document the fraud, and expose the truth. Usually it's about cars. This time it was about a person. The methodology is the same. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I put it on speaker. Marin Thompson, a voice I recognized from the rehearsal dinner. Tight with barely controlled rage. Sienna, you vindictive bitch. You couldn't stand that I was marrying your brother, so you— I cut her off. Ms. Blackwood, I'm recording this call and my brother is present as a witness. I'd advise you to speak carefully. The silence on the other end was heavy with fury. When she spoke again, her voice was ice. You think you're so smart digging through my family's private finances, exposing things that are none of your business? You've humiliated my family, destroyed my reputation. I presented publicly available information about financial fraud. I interrupted, my voice calm and professional, the same way I'd present findings about a counterfeit classic car. If the truth humiliates you, that's not my problem. It's yours. I heard her breathing hard through the phone. This isn't over. I'll sue you for defamation, for invasion of privacy. For what? I asked. For telling the truth? Good luck with that. My statement never mentioned your name. It never made claims that weren't supported by public records. And if you want to make this a legal matter, I should mention that the fraud case being filed Monday regarding the credit accounts opened in my brother's name without his knowledge might make your position a bit complicated. The line went dead. Declan looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You planned all of this, the statement, the investigation, the fraud charges. You had it mapped out before we even met yesterday. I shrugged. I had most of it mapped out the night of the rehearsal dinner when she called me inadequate. I just needed to verify my suspicions first. He shook his head slowly. I don't know whether to be terrified of you or grateful. I finished my beer, considering. Both is probably appropriate. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Ivy. Mom and Dad want you to come to dinner tomorrow. They have something they want to say. I showed Declan the message. Are you okay if I go? He looked confused. Why wouldn't you be? I studied my brother's face, seeing genuine incomprehension there. Because I just systematically destroyed your ex-fiance's life, exposed her fraud, filed criminal charges, turned her social circle against her. Some people might consider that excessive revenge. Declan was quiet for a long moment. You want to know what I think? I think you saved my life. Literally saved me from financial ruin. From marrying someone who saw me as a meal ticket. From becoming someone I hate. If that's excessive, then I'm grateful for the excess. That night, after Declan left, I sat in my workshop surrounded by the vintage cars that had built my career and reputation. My phone continued to buzz with messages, reporters requesting interviews, industry colleagues offering support, even a few tentative messages from people who'd been at the rehearsal dinner. apologizing for not speaking up when Sienna had humiliated me. I ignored them all, instead pulling up Bennett's complete file on Sienna's financial fraud. The criminal charges being filed Monday would focus on the credit accounts opened in Declan's name, but there was more here. Threads that suggested a pattern of behavior stretching back years. Bennett had found similar situations with two of Sienna's previous boyfriends, relationships that had ended abruptly when the men discovered unexpected debts or suspicious financial activity. Neither had pressed charges, apparently convinced by Sienna or her family's lawyers to walk away quietly. I forwarded those findings to the prosecutor handling Monday's case. They deserved to know they weren't dealing with a one-time mistake, but a calculated pattern of financial predation. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had always been sacred, a tradition that had survived Declan's social climbing and Sienna's disdain for our working-class origins. I arrived at 5 to find the whole family already gathered, Mom setting out her famous pot roast, Dad manning the grill on the back patio, Ivy arranging flowers on the dining table, and Declan looking nervous in the corner. "There she is," Mom said, pulling me into a fierce hug that spoke volumes about her relief at having her family intact again. "Our girl who takes no prisoners." Dad appeared from the patio, his expression serious. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday. What you did." I felt my stomach tighten, preparing for criticism about going too far, about the public nature of my exposure of Sienna's fraud. Instead, Dad pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to me. Inside was a check, their entire savings account, along with a handwritten note. "For the legal fees we know you're probably facing. We know you did what was right, even when it was hard. That's what we raised you to do. Love, Mom and Dad." Tears blurred my vision as I tried to hand the check back. "I can't take this. The legal fees are covered by Barrett Jackson's team. And even if they weren't," Mom cut me off. "That's not what the money's for, sweetheart. It's for whatever comes next. Court costs, investigator fees, whatever you need to finish what you started." Ivy joined us, slipping her arm through mine. "Sienna's lawyer called this morning, threatened to sue for defamation and emotional distress. Her family's trying to spin this as you being on a vendetta because Declan chose her over you." I laughed, the sound harsh and entirely without humor. "Her family's trying to avoid criminal charges by making me the villain." Classic deflection. Declan stood from the corner where he'd been silent. "I gave a statement to the prosecutor this morning about the credit accounts, about her opening them without my knowledge, about finding the contracts she'd signed in my name. They said with my testimony and Bennett's documentation, they have enough for multiple felony charges." The doorbell rang, interrupting our family meeting. Dad went to answer it and returned with two people I didn't recognize. A woman in her 50s wearing an expensive suit and a younger man carrying a professional camera. "Miss Thompson," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Patricia Carr from the Associated Press. I know this is family time, but I was hoping you might grant me an interview about the wedding fraud case. It's become a national story, and your unique approach to exposing financial deception has captured significant public interest." I glanced at my parents, seeing Dad's slight nod of approval. "We can talk for 30 minutes, I said, leading her to the living room while the photographer set up. "But I want to make something clear up front. This isn't about revenge or a family feud. This is about fraud, plain and simple." Patricia pulled out her recorder. "But surely there's a personal element, given that the accused was your brother's fiancé." I met her eyes steadily. "If I discovered a client was about to purchase a counterfeit car, would you ask if it was personal? Or would you understand it was professional responsibility? Sienna committed fraud. The fact that she did it to someone I love makes it more urgent, but doesn't change the fundamental nature of the crime." The interview lasted 2 hours, Patricia's questions growing increasingly sophisticated as I walked her through the investigation methodology. The public records that revealed the truth, the pattern of behavior suggesting serial fraud. The photographer captured me in my element, surrounded by the tools of my trade, the vintage cars that represented genuine value versus manufactured appearance. "One final question," Patricia said as we wrapped up. "Sienna's attorney released a statement this morning claiming you fabricated evidence out of jealousy. How do you respond?" I pulled up my laptop, showing her the same public records I'd shown the prosecutors. "Every piece of evidence is verifiable and publicly available. Bankruptcy filings are public record. Credit fraud complaints are documented. Lien notices are published. I didn't fabricate anything. I simply compiled what was already there for anyone willing to look." She studied the documents with the eye of an experienced journalist. "And the fact that no one looked before?" I shrugged. "Sienna was very good at maintaining appearances. Designer labels, country club memberships, the right social connections. She created an image that discouraged questions, but images are just surface. Underneath, the structure was rotten." After Patricia and her photographer left, my family gathered around the dinner table, the pot roast finally being served alongside Dad's grilled vegetables and Mom's famous dinner rolls. "To Marin," Ivy said, raising her glass of wine, "who taught us that sometimes the best revenge is just telling the truth." We clinked glasses, the sound crystal clear in the quiet dining room. "How bad is it going to get for Sienna?" Mom asked, her nurse's practicality cutting through sentiment. "I mean, realistically?" I set down my fork. "The criminal charges carry potential prison time if convicted. The credit fraud alone is a Class C felony. Add in the identity theft, the pattern of behavior with previous boyfriends, and she's looking at 3 to 5 years if the prosecutor pushes for maximum sentences. Dad whistled low. That's harsh. I met his eyes. She opened credit accounts in Declan's name without permission, racked up $200,000 in debt he knew nothing about, and had done the same thing to at least 2 other men before him. That's not a mistake. That's a crime spree. Declan pushed his food around his plate. Her mother called me this afternoon, begged me to drop the charges, said Sienna made mistakes but didn't deserve to have her life ruined. Offered to pay back every penny if I'd just make this go away. The table went silent. What did you say? Ivy asked quietly. Declan looked at me, his expression resolute. I told her that Sienna tried to ruin my life, tried to destroy my sister's reputation, and committed multiple felonies in the process. I said the appropriate response to crime is criminal prosecution, not negotiation. I felt something tight in my chest loosen slightly. That must have been hard. He laughed bitterly. Not as hard as it should have been. You know what the hardest part was? Realizing that I loved the person I thought she was, but that person never existed. She was as fake as those counterfeit Ferraris you expose. Just a convincing replica with nothing genuine underneath. My phone buzzed with an email notification from Barrett Jackson's legal team. The subject line read, Sienna Blackwood. Additional findings. I opened it at the table, my family watching as I read through the new information. What is it? Mom asked, noting my expression. I turned my laptop around, showing them the email. Barrett Jackson hired a private investigation firm to do a complete background check on Sienna. Given that her fraud attempt involved my professional reputation, they found something interesting. The report detailed Sienna's college years, a period she'd always been vague about in conversations. Turns out she'd been expelled from 2 universities for academic dishonesty before finally graduating from a 3rd, less prestigious school. More concerning, there were 3 separate incidents of check fraud in her early 20s that had been settled out of court by her father before his financial collapse. She's been doing this her whole life, Declan said quietly, reading over my shoulder. The fraud, the deception, the manufactured persona, it's not a recent thing. It's who she is. The doorbell rang again, and this time it was a courier with a legal filing. I signed for it and opened the envelope to find exactly what I'd expected. Sienna was suing me for defamation, invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with business relationships. The damages sought were absurd. $5 million. I handed the lawsuit to my father, who read it with his economics teacher's eye for analyzing bullshit. This won't go anywhere, he said confidently. Everything you said was true, and backed by documentation. You can't defame someone by telling the truth. Mom looked worried anyway. But the legal fees to defend yourself. I held up my phone, showing her the email I just received from Barrett Jackson's general counsel. We're covering all legal costs related to this matter. Ms. Blackwood's lawsuit attacks our employee's professional reputation, which makes it our fight as much as yours. We don't lose fights. The relief on Mom's face was immediate, but I saw something else in her expression too. A kind of fierce pride that her daughter had built a career and reputation solid enough that a major corporation would go to war to protect it. That night, as I prepared to leave my parents' house, Declan walked me to my car. I owe you an apology, he said, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Not just for the rehearsal dinner, though that was unforgivable, for everything leading up to it, for letting her change me, for forgetting where I came from, for choosing her approval over your respect. I leaned against my Mustang, the car I'd rebuilt bolt by bolt, proof that things broken could be made whole again if you were willing to do the work. You don't owe me an apology, Deck. You owe yourself one. You're the one who has to live with the choices you made. He nodded slowly. I'm quitting my job, the one she pushed me to take, the one with all her family's business connections, starting over somewhere that isn't contaminated by her influence. I considered this. That's probably smart, but do it because it's what you want. Not because you're running from what happened. Declan pulled his keys from his pocket, then paused. How did you know? About Sienna being a fraud? What was the tell that made you look deeper? I thought back to the rehearsal dinner, to the moment I'd known something was fundamentally wrong. She called me inadequate, I said simply. But the way she said it, it wasn't contempt for what I do. It was fear. Fear that I'd see through her the same way I see through counterfeit cars. People who are secure in themselves don't need to tear others down to feel adequate. Only frauds do. The criminal trial began 3 months later in a courtroom that felt more like a theater. Every seat packed with journalists, curiosity seekers, and members of Sienna's former social circle, who'd come to watch the fall of someone they'd once envied. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table, Barrett Jackson's lead attorney beside me, prepared to testify about the investigative methodology that had exposed the fraud. Sienna entered in a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back in a simple style that screamed, reformed defendant, trying to appear humble. Her attorney was Bradford Sterling, a legendary defense lawyer whose fees alone suggested her family had liquidated whatever assets remained to mount this defense. The prosecution's opening statement was surgical and devastating. This case is about a pattern of deception so comprehensive, so calculated that it fooled everyone in the defendant's orbit for years. Sienna Blackwood didn't just commit credit fraud against Declan Thompson. She built an entire false identity designed to trap financially stable men into relationships she could exploit. Sterling's opening was equally polished, painting Sienna as a young woman from a struggling family who'd made mistakes while trying to maintain appearances in a society that valued wealth above character. My client never intended to defraud anyone. She was drowning in her family's financial obligations, making desperate choices to preserve her father's dignity and her family's reputation. What the prosecution calls fraud, we call survival. I watched the jury, 12 faces carefully selected for their mix of backgrounds and perspectives. Half seemed sympathetic to Sterling's narrative. The other half looked skeptical, their expressions suggesting they'd already decided Sienna was guilty. The trial would be won or lost in the evidence, and we had months of documentation proving systematic, intentional fraud. The first witness was Declan, his testimony methodical and damning. He detailed finding the credit accounts opened in his name, the wedding contract signed without his knowledge, the discovery that Sienna had been systematically accessing his financial information throughout their relationship. "Did you authorize your fiancé to open credit accounts in your name?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Declan answered firmly. "Did you sign any of the wedding vendor contracts she submitted?" "No. I never saw them until after I called off the wedding." Sterling's cross-examination tried to paint Declan as a willing participant who'd gotten cold feet and was now trying to avoid responsibility. "Mr. Thompson, isn't it true that you enjoyed the lifestyle Ms. Blackwood provided? The expensive restaurants, the social events, the country club access?" Declan didn't flinch. "I enjoyed spending time with someone I thought I loved. I didn't know she was financing that lifestyle with credit fraud and my personal information." The prosecution then called Bennett, my forensic accountant, who walked the jury through a PowerPoint presentation that detailed every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every unauthorized credit inquiry. The evidence was overwhelming, each slide building on the previous one to create an undeniable picture of systematic financial predation. "In your professional opinion," the prosecutor asked, "could these transactions have been mistakes or errors?" Bennett adjusted his glasses. "Absolutely not. The pattern shows deliberate intent, sophisticated understanding of credit systems, and careful timing to avoid detection. This wasn't someone making mistakes. This was someone executing a plan." My testimony came on day 3. And I could feel Sienna's glare burning into me from the defense table as I was sworn in. The prosecutor led me through my background, establishing my credentials as an expert in authentication and fraud detection. "Ms. Thompson, you've testified in multiple cases involving counterfeit classic cars. How did you approach investigating Ms. Blackwood's background?" I looked directly at the jury. "The same way I approach any authentication. You examine the provenance, look for inconsistencies between claims and documentation, verify that the internal components match the external presentation. With cars, that means checking VIN numbers and manufacturing records. With people, it means public records and financial documentation." I walked them through my investigation process, showing how publicly available information revealed the truth behind Sienna's manufactured image. "Most frauds fail the same way," I explained. "They focus so much on the surface appearance that they neglect the underlying structure. Sienna presented as old money with country club connections, but the financial records showed a family in bankruptcy, maxed credit cards, and a history of debt litigation." Sterling's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to paint me as vindictive and personally motivated. "Isn't it true, Miss Thompson, that you were angry about being excluded from your brother's wedding?" I met his eyes calmly. "I was hurt by the way I was treated, but my investigation began because I recognized patterns of behavior that suggested fraud, not because of personal grievance. If I'd discovered the same patterns in a client's vintage car purchase, I would have investigated just as thoroughly." He shifted tactics. "You make a living exposing frauds, correct? Isn't it possible you were motivated by professional advancement, using my client's situation to generate publicity for your Barrett-Jackson position?" I smiled slightly. "Mr. Sterling, I was already featured in Collector Car Weekly, had authentication contracts with 3 major auction houses, and was being flown internationally to verify classic cars before I ever met your client. I didn't need publicity. I needed to protect my brother from financial ruin." The courtroom was silent as Sterling sat down, his cross-examination having strengthened my credibility rather than undermined it. The prosecution's final witness was a previous boyfriend of Sienna's, Marcus Chen, a software engineer who dated her 4 years ago. His testimony was devastating in its simplicity. "She asked to borrow my laptop to check email one day. 3 months later, I discovered she'd used my saved passwords to access my bank accounts, credit cards, and investment portfolios. When I confronted her, she cried and said she'd just been curious about how much I made, that she was insecure about our financial compatibility. I believed her and didn't press charges. Biggest mistake of my life. Sterling tried to argue that Marcus's testimony should be excluded as prejudicial, but the judge allowed it as evidence of pattern and practice. The jury's expressions shifted from sympathetic to disgusted as Marcus detailed finding unauthorized charges, transferred funds, and his year-long battle to restore his credit after ending the relationship. "Did you report this to the police?" the prosecutor asked. Marcus shook his head. "Her father's lawyer convinced me it would be my word against hers, that pursuing charges would be expensive and time-consuming. He offered to pay me $10,000 to walk away and sign an NDA. I took it because I was young and scared and just wanted it to be over." The defense case lasted less than a day. Sienna took the stand in her favor, tears flowing as she described the pressure of maintaining her family's reputation after her father's business failures. "I made mistakes," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I should have been honest with Declan about my family's financial situation, but I never intended to commit fraud. I thought we'd get married, that these expenses would become our shared responsibility, that I was just helping us start our life together." Sterling asked, "Did you love Mr. Thompson?" Sienna nodded, mascara streaking her face. "I loved him so much. I thought he was the one. I was trying to give us the wedding I thought he deserved, the life I thought we both wanted." The performance was Oscar-worthy, but when the prosecutor stood for cross-examination, the facade crumbled. "Miss Blackwood, you testified that you loved Mr. Thompson. Did you love him when you called his sister inadequate at the rehearsal dinner?" Sienna's eyes flashed. "I was stressed about the wedding. I said things I regret." "Did you love him when you opened credit accounts in his name without permission? I thought we were going to be married. What's his would be mine anyway." The prosecutor pounced. "But you weren't married yet. You had no legal right to his credit, his information, or his financial identity, correct?" Sienna's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with their verdict. I sat between Declan and our parents as the four-person stood, the courtroom so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. "On the charge of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty." Sienna's mother sobbed in the gallery behind us. "On the charge of credit fraud, we find the defendant guilty." Sterling's expression remained neutral, but I saw his hands clench on the table. "On the charge of theft by deception, we find the defendant guilty." One by one, the guilty verdicts rang out. 8 separate felony counts, all confirmed by the jury's unanimous decision. Sienna's face was white, her carefully applied makeup standing out starkly against her pallor. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, denying Sterling's request for bail pending sentencing. "Given the defendant's history of financial deception and the severity of the convictions, I find there's substantial risk of flight," the judge declared. As bailiffs led Sienna away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me, and the mask of victimhood fell away entirely. What I saw in her eyes was pure hatred, the genuine emotion finally breaking through all her manufactured performances. The sentencing hearing brought closure that felt both satisfying and hollow. The judge imposed the maximum sentence on each count, to be served consecutively: 8 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, and full restitution to all victims including Declan, Marcus, and the 2 other ex-boyfriends who'd come forward during the trial. "Ms. Blackwood," the judge said, her voice stern, "you didn't just commit financial crimes, you weaponized intimacy, turning relationships into opportunities for predation. You showed no remorse, no accountability, until you were caught. This sentence reflects the severity of your actions and the calculated nature of your deceptions." Sienna stood silently, her performance finally exhausted, as the bailiffs prepared to escort her from the courtroom for the last time. Before they led her away, she looked back at Declan one final time. "I did love you," she said quietly. "That was real, even if nothing else was." Declan's response was simple and devastating. "No, you loved what I represented. You never knew who I actually was." Outside the courthouse, I faced a wall of cameras and reporters. Barrett Jackson's PR team had prepared a statement, but I spoke from the heart instead. This case was never about revenge or family drama. It was about recognizing patterns of fraud and refusing to let them continue. Sienna Blackwood committed crimes that could have destroyed multiple lives. The verdict holds her accountable for those choices. That's not vengeance. That's justice. Patricia Carr from the Associated Press called out a question. "Do you feel vindicated after being called inadequate at the rehearsal dinner?" I considered the question. I never needed vindication from someone whose entire life was a fraud. I knew my worth before Sienna tried to diminish it. All I did was make sure she faced consequences for her crimes. If that makes me vindictive in some people's eyes, I can live with that. As I turned to leave, Sterling emerged from the courthouse, his expensive suit rumpled from the long day. "Off the record, Miss Thompson," he called. "That was the most thorough fraud investigation I've seen from a civilian. If you ever get tired of cars, I know several firms that would pay handsomely for those skills." I smiled. "Thanks, but I prefer authentic restorations to defending frauds. More satisfying outcomes." 6 months after Sienna's sentencing, I stood in Barrett Jackson's Scottsdale facility, presenting a 1967 Shelby GT500 to its new owner, a tech billionaire who'd paid $3 million for the verified authentic vehicle. The sale was featured in Collector Car Weekly, alongside a sidebar about my role in revolutionizing automotive authentication standards. My career had exploded in the aftermath of the trial, with auction houses across the country requesting my expertise and my salary tripling as Barrett Jackson expanded my role to include training other authenticators. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sienna had tried to exclude me from her perfect wedding because I was inadequate, and in doing so had catapulted my career to heights I'd never imagined. Declan had kept his promise about starting over, taking a position with an environmental nonprofit that paid significantly less than his corporate job, but left him sleeping well at night. He called weekly now. Our relationship rebuilt through his consistent effort and genuine accountability for his past choices. We'd never be exactly as we were before Sienna, but what we'd built was stronger for being consciously chosen, rather than assumed. I'd heard through mutual connections that Sienna's family had lost everything in the aftermath of the trial. The country club membership was gone, the house foreclosed, her mother working retail after decades of social prominence. Her father had attempted suicide 3 months into Sienna's incarceration, surviving but suffering permanent health consequences that left him dependent on the same social services his family had once looked down upon. Some people might feel guilt about the collateral damage to Sienna's family, but I'd learned through the trial that her parents had known about her fraud for years, had paid off previous victims, had enabled her behavior rather than demanding accountability. They'd chosen comfortable denial over difficult intervention, and now they were living with those consequences. The civil lawsuit Sienna had filed against me was dismissed with prejudice, the judge ruling that truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Barrett Jackson's legal team filed a countersuit for malicious prosecution, winning a judgment that Sienna would spend the rest of her life paying off, assuming she ever had income to garnish after serving her 8-year sentence. My workshop had expanded to include 2 junior mechanics I was training in restoration techniques, both young women who'd faced similar dismissal of their capabilities because they didn't fit traditional expectations. Teaching them filled something in me that pure professional success couldn't quite reach, the satisfaction of proving that inadequacy was in the eye of the beholder, not an inherent truth. One afternoon, while supervising the restoration of a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line made me pause. Letter from inmate Blackwood. I debated deleting it unread, but curiosity won. Sienna's letter was surprisingly brief and devoid of the manipulative language that had characterized all her previous communication. Maren, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I needed you to know that you were right about everything. I built my entire life on fraud because I was terrified of being revealed as inadequate myself. Ironically, by trying to hide my inadequacy, I became actually inadequate. As a person, as a partner, as a human being. I have 8 years to think about that. I hope when I get out, I'll be someone different. Not someone you'd ever trust or forgive, but at least someone who's honest about being a work in progress. You didn't ruin my life. You held up a mirror and I hated what I saw. That's on me, not you. I read the letter twice, then filed it in my Sienna folder, the collection of documents from the investigation, trial, and aftermath that served as a reminder that surface appearance could be the most sophisticated fraud of all. I didn't respond to her letter because there was nothing to say. Accountability was a good first step, but it didn't undo the damage she'd caused, the relationships she'd weaponized, the years she'd spent perfecting deception over developing genuine character. That evening, my family gathered at my newly purchased home, a modest craftsman with a 3-car garage I'd converted into a professional workshop. Dad manned the grill while Mom directed traffic in the kitchen. Ivy entertained her new boyfriend with stories from our childhood, and Declan helped me organize tools in the garage. You know what's weird? He said, handing me a socket wrench. A year ago, I would have been embarrassed to spend Saturday night with my family in a mechanic's garage. Now it's the only place I want to be. I bumped his shoulder with mine. That's called having actual values instead of performing them for an audience. He laughed. When did my little sister get so wise? I gestured at the cars surrounding us. When I started paying attention to what was real versus what was just for show. Later, after everyone had left and the house settled into quiet stillness, I pulled out my laptop and drafted an email to Patricia Carr at the Associated Press. She'd been following up periodically, interested in doing a longer feature about the intersection of fraud detection, family dynamics, and the meaning of authenticity in a society obsessed with image. Patricia, I'm ready to do that extended interview, but on one condition. I want the story to focus not on Sienna's downfall, but on what authenticity looks like. The hard work of building something real. Whether it's a restored classic car, or a rebuilt relationship, or a career based on genuine expertise. Fraud makes for exciting headlines, but authenticity is what matters in the long run. Her response came within an hour, exactly the angle I was hoping for. Let's make this about what you've built, not just what you've exposed. The interview, when it ran 2 months later, became one of the most shared articles in the Associated Press's lifestyle section. It featured photos of me in my workshop, highlighted my family's working-class roots as a source of strength rather than shame, and positioned my fraud detection work as an extension of values learned early: the importance of looking beneath the surface, the courage to tell uncomfortable truths, the understanding that real worth couldn't be faked. The only person who seemed disappointed by my post-trial trajectory was Quinn, who'd hoped the publicity might drive me toward more sensational projects. "You could write a book about this," she insisted during one of her visits from New York. "Talk show circuit, podcast deals, maybe even a Netflix documentary. People are fascinated by fraud and revenge stories." I showed her the 3 cars currently in my workshop, each one a masterpiece of engineering waiting to be restored to its original glory. "This is what I do, Quinn. I authenticate, I restore, I teach others to recognize genuine value. Sienna was a fraud I happened to expose, but she's not who I am or what I'm about." Quinn studied the vehicles with the eye of someone who appreciated craftsmanship, even if she couldn't replicate it herself. "You're probably right. The revenge story has shelf life. The authenticity story is evergreen." She paused at the door before leaving. "For what it's worth, I think Sienna picked the wrong sister to call inadequate. You were always the one with actual substance." A year after the trial, I received an invitation to speak at a fraud prevention conference, my expertise now recognized beyond the automotive world. The irony amused me. Sienna had tried to exclude me from social events because I was inadequate, and now I was being invited to prestigious conferences as a fraud detection expert. The speech I delivered focused on patterns of deception, how fraud manifested across industries, and the importance of verification over trust. In my work authenticating classic cars, I told the audience of financial investigators and corporate security specialists, "I've learned that frauds succeed because people want to believe. They want the story the car presents. The racing pedigree, the celebrity ownership, the historical significance. My job is to look past what I want to believe and focus on what the evidence proves." The same applies to people. Sienna Blackwood succeeded because people wanted to believe she was who she presented herself to be. Breaking through that desire to believe requires both courage and methodology. The standing ovation that followed wasn't for exposing Sienna. It was for articulating a framework for recognizing deception that transcended any single case. As I left the stage, my phone buzzed with a text from Declan. "Watched your speech on the live stream. Dad's crying. He says he's proud of both his daughters, but especially proud of the one who taught us all to look beneath the surface." I smiled, pocketing my phone as I headed to my next presentation, the one where I'd teach automotive authentication techniques to a room full of fraud investigators, proving that the skills used to verify a classic car's authenticity applied to virtually every form of deception. Sienna had called me inadequate because I worked with my hands, built things from scratch, got grease under my fingernails while she performed sophistication in designer labels. But adequacy, I'd learned, wasn't about appearing successful. It was about being genuinely skilled, consistently ethical, and comfortable with who you were beneath whatever image you projected to the world. And by that measure, I'd always been more than adequate. I'd been real.